we families lost our loved ones forever.
The pain of a decade of grief was written across the faces of those here. Family members of the Western hostages killed in Syria, expressing their sense of loss.
It is a hollow victory. And now Elsheikh and Cody, who have lost their freedom, country, and families. It's a tragic cycle of violence.
My name's Shafee Elsheikh.
The sentencing of Elsheikh comes 4 months after his conviction on charges of kidnapping and conspiracy to murder. He is the man who grew up in London and who became the cruelest of Islamist jihadists. He was a member of the notorious gang of ISIS kidnappers and killers who were known to their hostages as the Beatles. At his trial, he had tried to argue to the jury that it was all a case of mistaken identity. It was an argument he had rehearsed in an earlier interview with ITV News.
I was not standing over them with a weapon and guarding them. I was not moving them to be executed. I was not doing any of this sort.
Among those seized and murdered by the ISIS gang were Britain's David Haines, John Cantley and Alan Henning, and Americans Kayla Muller, Peter Kassig, Stephen Sotloff and James Foley.
Oh, and here's Daddy.
David Haines was a humanitarian worker, helping those displaced by the war in Syria. His daughter wasn't here today for the sentencing, but gave us this reaction back in April when Elsheikh was convicted.
He has to sit for 23.5 hours a day in a horrible cell and think about what he's done for the rest of his life. So that is real justice.
The great investigative breakthrough was when British police realised they had arrested Elsheikh and his fellow jihadi terrorist Alexander Coty at a 2011 rally in London. It linked the two men to ISIS because former hostages had heard them discussing their earlier arrests. The sentencing here today brings a measure, of course, of closure to the family, but no end to their anguish and no end either to the riddle of how and why these British nationals became amongst the most notorious of the ISIS killers. The judge described Elsheikh's behaviour as horrific, barbaric, callous and brutal. He is a jihadi killer who will now spend the rest of his life behind bars. Robert Moore, News at 10. In Alexandria, Virginia.